Hello, I'm Think Tank. I'm a Unity developer who decided it probably wasn't a good idea to have all my eggs in one basket after the great Unity debacle of 2023. So I'm learning how to use Godot. I'm recreating my first game, Sewer Souls, that I made in Game Maker for a class project and was left largely unfinished, but now gets a second chance at life thanks to this guy. So if you're interested, follow along as the Unity dev learns Godot. Okay, I just figured it was a good idea to explain the basic premise of this series for any new viewers or just in case people have forgotten the reason I'm trying to do this in the first place. For this episode, I've made progress in leaps and bounds since the last update, going from this to this. I went from little more than a test level with barely implemented mechanics to what might be considered a fledgling game, if you're being generous. I'm trying a different format for this episode because there are so many changes that I can't go into detail about everything I did, so I'll just read the changelog and show some footage or diagrams explaining the feature or change with only as much detail as is necessary. After that, I'll discuss things that I learned, struggled with, or appreciated about Godot while working on this episode. Alright, ready, set, go. First off, I created a new class called Item that can serve as a base for everything from weapons to keys to health packs. Then, I created a subclass of Item called Weapon and two subclasses of Weapon called Weapon Melee and Weapon Projectile to allow me to easily define and handle different weapons. With those classes set up, I converted my existing melee weapons to the new system and made a pistol as a kind of base for future projectile weapons. After that, I figured it was time to start animating the melee weapons, so I added weapon animations, including a combo finisher which doesn't do any more damage yet, and changed the way weapons damage enemies to be determined by the animation, so it makes sense and fits each weapon. To do this, I had to change how I was dealing damage. Previously, every melee weapon would have a collider that was always active and kept track of whatever was inside of it, and would damage them when you attacked. Now the way it works is the collider will turn on when the animation is at the right point and adds anything it hits to its list of targets, then damages them and removes them from its list. This is so it won't hit them more than once in a single attack. Controlling when the damage collider is turned on from the animation gives me a lot of flexibility and lets me make the weapons feel unique and give them advantages over each other in different areas. For instance, the knife is faster, but has a much smaller hitbox, and the shovel has a very wide arc of attack and stuns enemies for longer, though it's much slower. Eventually, the knife will also cause a bleed effect for damage over time, but that's for the next episode. I think I can make this less complicated later, but I just tweaked what I already had so I didn't accidentally break anything. Because of how projectiles work, being not attached to their weapon, I added a damage component that can be attached to things that damage other things with health components. It's called from a hitbox component on an object that does the damage, so for melee weapons it's the weapon itself, but for projectile weapons it's attached to the projectiles. Pretty straightforward, I think. With these new weapons I had, I needed an inventory component that works with the item socket component to allow the player to pick up and drop weapons or items found in the world and switch between active items. It was fairly straightforward to implement, even though I've never made one before, and now it does exactly what I wanted. Once I had an inventory item, I needed an actual item to pick up, so I created an item pickup object that works with the inventory system and references a packed scene to allow the inventory to instantiate them. It's not my best work, because I'm still kind of unfamiliar with how Godot handles instantiating items and what the best practice is for doing that, but this works for now. After that, I figured I should have a better area to run around in, so I designed an actual first level, and made more tile map assets to decorate the level. A commenter on my last video let me know about tile map layers, so I didn't have a bunch of tile maps lying around. Oddly enough, layers are now obsolete in the newest version of Godot, and the new system is similar to how I was doing it before, which is kind of funny. but since I'm still on 4.2, that information is still very helpful. As an aside, while I was building a new level, I finally got Y sorting working. And I finally found a palette I feel can accommodate my needs. It's called Rewild 64. I found it on low spec and I've been slowly switching assets over to it since then, and I'm really liking the results. I figured out how to make a main menu and a victory screen, so I added those just for funsies. They went through a lot of changes and you can see the process here. I'm sure they'll continue to change as I get better with Godot's UI system, which is drastically different from Unity's. There are some things I really like about it, and others I think I'm just not experienced enough with to understand, but I won't have much to say about it until I learn more. After I did that, I thought it would be easy to quickly add some new states for the creatures to use depending on certain conditions. This was a bad idea. I decided on 3 new states to add: Flee, Stunned, and Dead. I ended up having lots of horrible problems with states overriding each other when they shouldn't, so after cleaning up call order as much as I could without making things too rigid, I added an isLocked flag to states, and if that flag is set to true, then they cannot be interrupted, unless the change state call explicitly specifies it should override it. The states are pretty self-explanatory, but I'll explain them anyway. Flee state is entered when a creature's health falls below a certain threshold. A creature will panic and run from the last creature to attack it, which kind of breaks and will still attack if you catch up with it, but that actually feels more realistic, so I've decided that's an intended feature. For the stun state, I added stun time to the damage component script, which for NPCs pushes them into a state where they can't move or attack for an amount of time. I'm thinking that I might use the same functionality to determine invincibility time for the player. I added the dead state because I didn't want the enemies to just pop out of existence on death, so it's used to keep them from doing anything while they expire. In the process of troubleshooting the creature behavior states, I added a status display that the state machine can use to play animations above the creatures to show their current state, like Flee or Stunned. Once I had that figured out, I tried out auto-load singletons to make a toolbox script that stores useful functions I want to be able to call from any other script without needing a direct reference. Once I'd made that, I decided to add a game manager that's local to each level and keeps track of things like the number of enemies left, what the next level to load is, and what exit to set active on start. I made this a singleton manually so it wouldn't carry over between scenes, but I could still reference it easily from any script in the current scene. With that working, I decided to add health bars that display over the creatures and one that displays on the HUD for the player. I later made the creature health bars only show when they've been hurt. Okay, so I might have made a little bit of a mistake here. In my original script, I had written down that I accidentally added the health bars, but that's actually not true. I did intentionally add them to the enemies. However, I didn't realize that it would be so easy. So, my bad, and this next section I'm going to talk about it like I did it by accident, but just ignore that, and marvel at how cool it was that it just worked so easily. This was where I really enjoyed working with Godot's UI, because I accidentally added the health bars to the enemies. I had just attached the UI component to the health component without thinking, and when I booted up the game, all the enemies had health bars over their heads, and I didn't have to do anything else. I was very pleasantly surprised. In addition to the player health bar, I also added a bar to the HUD that keeps track of the amount of enemies, spawned or unspawned, still in the level. Once I was tracking all the stuff I wanted and displaying it to the player, I made a level exit object that's added to a list and enabled by the game manager at the start of the level, so the player is forced to explore the level to find it. Since you could actually finish the level now, I made another auto-load singleton called Game Data that is actually a node that persists between scenes and is used to store and calculate the score based on performance on the level the player just finished. The game then takes that data and uses it to display the score and the level clear state in the victory screen. Well, that's all for the new features. After that, I just made some minor changes and fixes the stuff that was bothering me. Honestly, probably should have stopped earlier than I did and made this into like 3 episodes, but I was on a tear and I couldn't stop myself. I became more animal than man. An animal who codes. So a dove, I guess. I became an out-of-control dove. Anyway, I had so much fun working on this episode and learned a lot about Godot. In the next section, I'll explore some of those things I learned about and share some tips and/or tricks I've picked up so far. Hey, it's the next section now. First up is auto-load singletons. They're really cool, and while you can effectively do the same thing in Unity, the interface and the way they're handled in Godot is much more approachable for someone unfamiliar with them. If you need data to persist across scenes like score, lives, or anything else that you don't want to be specific to a single scene, these are what you're looking for. Second is ditching the default script editor.
Get the hell out of here!
I would recommend anyone using Godot seriously to set up VS Code with Godot. If you've used Unity long enough, it's like using mono-developed versus Visual Studio. It's a night and day difference, and with few exceptions, much better for writing code. There is a learning curve though. You can literally open every file in the project, including scenes, as code, so you can end up lost in your own project's hierarchy, which is why good organization is important. The only real downside I've noticed using VS Code, as opposed to the built-in script editor, is the lack of signal connection and function override indicators. This can make remembering what is a signal function and what is inherited from another class a little tricky. There may be a way to set that up though. If anyone watching this knows how, I'd be more than happy to know. The third thing I learned how to do is how to set up a GitHub repository for my project and use it for a backup, so in the event something horrible happens, or I do something really dumb, I can recover my work or roll back changes easily. Unity has a handy version control using Plastic SCM that's built right into the engine, but Godot doesn't yet. I've heard that it might be implemented soon, but for right now, you have to manually add the project to a repository. It's definitely worth it though, and a good learning opportunity if you haven't used GitHub before. So that's what I've been up to. I've really been enjoying my time with Godot in this project, and I'm looking forward to making a fun little game. For the next episode, I'd like to see if I can add some more levels and get the flow of the gameplay ironed out, as well as adding more enemies and weapons. I actually already have another enemy in the current version that I'll probably make a short to show off. I think once I have a fun little playable demo, I'll put it up on itch.io for you guys to try out too. I'd love any feedback you have, and I want to see if people think it's fun. I may even end up releasing it for real if it's actually a good game. In the course of writing this episode, I ended up with basically another episode's worth of just me talking about my experience with Godot so far, and what I like and what I don't like about it. It won't be part of the A Unity Dev Learns Godot series. It will be sort of a separate video, and I'll give it a really inflammatory name like, "Is Godot actually good?" or something like that, and upload it separately, because I think it would be a lot of fun to talk about that, but most people probably wouldn't care. So if you're interested, you can look forward to that soon. Well, that's all for this episode. As always, if you checked out my app, Real Chimes, I'd appreciate it, along with any feedback you might have. There was a problem with banner ads still showing on iOS if you paid to remove them, but that should be fixed now. Though if you still get them, please let me know. I'm also considering doing a 2.0 version if enough people start using it, and maybe I'll make some videos about that too. Anyway, I hope you liked the video. Give it a like if you did. You can find me on Twitter and Instagram under these names. Subscribe if you want more, and I'll see you in the next video. Okay, bye.